When I was a kid, I had this bag of marbles that were pretty special. I used to carry it with me back and forth to school, and at recess, we'd go out behind Clement School and we would get out the marbles and we'd play for keeps or for funsies because we wanted to keep as many marbles of our own as we could. And in my bag, I had cat's eyes and I had puries and I had steelies and boulders and it was just a blast. Even though the glass marbles would sometimes get chipped, it was a blast to have those marbles and to be able to play at recess. And boy, did you sweat it if they were missing out of your desk when recess came, or you forgot to bring them to school because they were an important part of elementary life when I was a kid. When we think about the story of Solomon and Ecclesiastes, it's rather like a bag of marbles that you are now beginning to evaluate. And if I found that bag of marbles that I used to have and I began to look through it, the steelies would be a little rusty, the cat's eyes would be a little chipped, the puries would be dusted over, and I would look at it and I would go, oh, that was fond memories, but it wouldn't hold much value for me today. A good reminder of the past, but I'm not taking it to the bank. I'm not trading it for anything at the store. Um, it would be empty to me. So the book of Ecclesiastes is rather like asking us all to grab our bag of marbles and look inside and pour it out and see what inside is important. So let's do that. We're going to do it together with a great guide. He introduces himself as Kohelet, which is Hebrew for the assembler, the preacher. He's going to play a role of bringing us together, taking us all on the same journey so that we can all come out at the same conclusion. He also identifies himself. He says he is the son of David. He is king in Jerusalem. And while many doubt and debate about who it is, pretty sure it's Solomon. At least that's who I'm going to follow as we go through the book of Ecclesiastes. So let's take a look at the first 11 verses of the book of Ecclesiastes. Grab your Bible and let's look through it. The first couple of verses introduce the whole book. So verses 1 through 11 are kind of the prologue, but the first couple of verses really tell us um, who wrote it and then why. And in that second verse, we have three different phrases that I want to talk about because they're important in interpreting our bag of marbles. Um, so the first one, of course, is vanity of vanities. Now, Hebrew doesn't have a way of expressing the superlative like we do. If something is big, then it's by comparison something else is bigger, or the biggest thing is the thing at the top, right? So in Hebrew, to express the superlative, you repeat the word. So when um, Jesus is wanting to underscore something incredibly important, his mind will say, or his words will be, verily, verily. Or when you go to the temple, there is the holy place, and then there is the holy of holies, the most holy place. So when Solomon starts out this book by saying vanity of vanities, he's saying this is the worst vanity of them all. And out of all the things that could waste time, of all the things that could be meaningless or frustrating or empty, uh, the biggest one has to do with what is good profit, what will help mankind, what can we grab a hold of and rely on, because it all seems to slip through our fingers. So he's introducing his theme, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. But he's going to qualify that for a minute in the two phrases that come after that. What does a man profit under the sun? So let's take those two phrases. We are looking for what profits a man. Now, we could say that we're looking for meaning or purpose because we are, but if we discover that that meaning or purpose was detrimental to us or had no great useful meaning or purpose, then it would be lost. So, what we're really looking for is what in man profits. What thing can we go after that we would be sure matters for time and for eternity? Because that other phrase tells us where we're looking. What profits us under the sun? So the heavens are the domain of God. Under the sun means that area where vanity reigns. If we don't take God into account, what do we have in our bag of marbles? Do you see? So three themes are given to us right at the beginning. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does it profit a man for all his toil under the sun? All right, so let's see how he introduces his theme. He goes into immediately beginning to talk about the cycles that happen in nature, because they illustrate that continuity of life as life goes on over and over again. So we have the cycle of life. We are born, we die, one generation rises, that generation eventually passes away, and a new generation begins to rule and reign in society and make progress, and then that dies out, and there's another group, the circle of life, one generation to the next generation. The second one is the cycle of the sun, rising and setting, and then hastening back to the place where it began, or the wind moving north and south, running like a jet stream around the earth and back to where it was before, to blow again. Um, then we have water racing down into streams and lakes and oceans, and then evaporating and returning right back to where it was before, to make the run again. All of these natural cycles, they're regular, they're predictable, they're useful, and they're even beautiful. They're the signs of a creator, the signs of a designer. If you think about just the rising and the setting of the sun, some of the most beautiful things that we'll see in life is some of those days when the water cycle runs in front of the sun and we get beautiful sunsets, incredible colors. And so we have all of these cycles. The cycles come and they go. They're regular, they're predictable, they're useful. But what about us, right? One generation rises and falls. My life rises and falls. And like Psalm 90 says, my life is brief. I'm just one little cog in the wheel. What does it matter for me? What about man in the midst of it? That's going to be our theme through the book of Ecclesiastes. We have regular cycles that seem permanent, and then we are anything but permanent. This passage will go on to say um, that he is weary. In fact, he'll say all things are full of weariness. It's kind of a description of the rat race. There are 100,000 things that can vie for our attention, um, and we commit ourselves to all of them, and we get worn out. And again, we might look back and go, did I wear myself out on things that didn't last? There's a great verse from Proverbs chapter 30 at the beginning. It's the words of Agur, the son of Jika, the oracle. And he writes, the man declares, I am weary, O God. I am weary, O God, and worn out. There are a lot of writers and philosophers who have written from an Egyptian sage in 2300 BC who wrote a treatise called The Man Who Is Tired of Living, trying to decide whether suicide was a good idea or not. And then we have Sartre writing a book called Nausea and calling human beings useless passions, or Camus, who says the only question left for philosophers is the question of suicide, right? Like Nietzsche, everything is futile. What if that is the case? That would mean all things truly are full of weariness. But there's more to life than that. So he goes on to describe the rat race in a bit more detail. He says the eye is never filled, never satisfied, the ear is never filled. You get the idea that ultimately and finally, the things that we see and the things that we hear don't last, right? I remember standing on the edge of Copper Canyon in Mexico and my knees giving way because the view was just so awesome. I remember hearing great music and thinking to myself, that is awesome, but I'm not still at Copper Canyon and it can't fill my mind and heart for eternity. I can't listen to great music and have it satisfy that God-shaped hole in my life. So the eye and the ear, they're never really content. They're useful here, but ultimately and finally, if this is all there is, then the eye and the ear bring frustration. And then he goes on to talk about history, one of my favorite subjects. And he talks about how history repeats itself. So an action happens in the past, and because human beings are the same kind of human beings and they make the same kind of mistakes and they have the same failures and the same successes, we just keep doing the same thing over and over again. So he says history repeats itself and then history forgets. Do you remember the poem of Ozymandias? I was watching a video recently about the capital of the Hittite civilization and the man who ruled it and was able to defeat the Egyptians during his reign. And you're watching it, and I remember back in school, some of the books that were written about the ancient world said Hittites were a myth, and now we can study the Hittite language. We can go visit in Turkey, the Hittite capital, but we forgot. History repeats itself, and history never truly, ultimately, and finally remembers the deeds that we have done. So that's how Kohelet starts out his treatise. What he's going to do is he's going to pull out our bag of marbles and begin to look at them one by one and ask us, is this worth selling your soul for? Is this worth something ultimately and finally? So I can imagine in my mind that I'm pouring out those marbles and I'm looking at them. Some are chipped, some of them are still dirty with Clement School dirt from the playground. Um, some of them are chipped, but they don't hold any lasting value for me. I can imagine that there might be some people listening to this that say, you know what, I don't even have any marbles left in my bag. Nothing gives me pleasure anymore. Nothing gives me any sense of accomplishment or meaning or purpose. I got nothing. What is there for me? So I want you to hang on as we go through the book of Proverbs, book of Ecclesiastes, because he is going to show us what is ultimately and finally the thing that we can give our lives to, the thing that will fill our lives with meaning and purpose and rest and accomplishment and hope. And so Ecclesiastes ultimately and finally is a book of joy. It might sound odd so far when it says everything is weariness. But remember, he started his treatise by saying this is true of things under the sun. He'll go on to say, and just a little hope for the future, he says God has set eternity in the hearts of men. That's why under the sun is frustrating, because we are not made for under the sun living. We are only made for men and women to enjoy what we have under the lordship of Christ and living life out with his meaning and purpose. So it'd be like me pouring out my bag of marbles, sifting through, separating, coming down, and at the bottom of the bag, I pull out a pearl. Slip my mind that one day somehow a pearl got in my bag. You can imagine the joy, right? So here is a man. This is from kid's book by a Mick Inkpen. Really cool. Nick Butterworth and Mick Inkpen wrote a book about the pearl of great price. And this man sold everything. His fridge full of fizzy drinks. He sold his feathery hat. He sold everything because of the joy that came with buying that pearl. That's what Ecclesiastes will do. It'll separate our dirty marbles. It'll separate out the chipped ones. It'll separate out the things that don't matter, ultimately and finally, and help us to find the thing that does. And that will just be the beginning of the story. So I look forward to following with you through the story of Ecclesiastes. Make sure you hang with us to the end, because it really is a book of joy.